I've misplaced my copy of 1942, and I'm very distraught by this unfortunate occurrence. I am a bit of a Battlefield enjoyer. I've played the majority of Battlefield games that have been released, some more extensively than others. As a wee lad, I played a bunch of bot matches in 1942 and Desert Combat. Battlefield 2 was the first video game I was allowed to play online. I played the living shit out of Battlefield 3 in high school and a fuck ton of Battlefield 4 throughout my late teens and the majority of my 20s. Battlefield 1 was a contentious title for me personally. I played the open beta and did not care for the level that it shipped with, but everything else seemed solid and fun. I figured one bad map was no big deal. The BF3 and 4 betas shipped with Operation Metro and Siege of Shanghai respectively, and I don't like either of those maps. So I said fuck it and pre-ordered it, and then the game came out and every map not named Suez kinda fucking sucked. To date, Battlefield 1 is still the only Battlefield game where I prefer to use vehicles over infantry because its level design is just not conducive to how I enjoy playing Battlefield games. Battlefield 5 is where things actually started to roll downhill. I watched the trailer and immediately knew it would not be a game that I would be purchasing.
Base star ordering success story, number 3. My tattoo got infected, so they've had to cut off my arm. I am getting a robot hand.
But 2042 is where shit really hit the fan. Like, don't get me wrong, Battlefield 5 was incredibly stupid, but 2042? Holy shit. Near future is one of my least favorite settings for an FPS because more often than not it leads to the developers adding stupid shit like wall running and jetpacks and grappling hooks that turn you into fucking Spider-Man. Oh hey, it's Black Ops 7! Watching the trailer and seeing the wingsuit was enough of a warning that the game was gonna be ass, but then the tornado showed up and I knew the franchise would be dead as shit for the foreseeable future. Fast forward to June 2023. Almost 10 years had passed since a Battlefield game released that I actually enjoyed. Battlefield 3 was a ghost town, and Battlefield 4 was growing stale after nearly a decade of play. Then, an indie game called BattleBit Remastered releases into Steam Early Access and starts blowing the fuck up. Originally a low-poly mill sim that passed Steam Greenlight in 2015, its slow development cycle saw 2 consecutive Battlefield titles crash and burn, leaving a void in the FPS sphere where the titan of the genre once stood. Realizing the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that lay before them, the devs pivoted BattleBit to a Battlefield clone with mill sim elements and support for 254-player games, released it into Steam Early Access, and promptly sold 1.8 million copies in its first 2 weeks on Steam. And it was the breath of fresh air myself and many others were waiting for. It wasn't entirely perfect, the vector was a bitch at launch, but it got its PP whacked swiftly. There still is that persistent issue where inputs for reloading, switching weapons, and bandaging just gets ignored sometimes. Not being allowed to spawn on contested objectives you still control is stupid. Footsteps are crazy loud for some reason. Like, what sounds like somebody right around the corner from you is actually someone up 3 floors on the building across the street levels of crazy loud. And the maps were, and still are, a mixed bag, ranging from dog shit like Basra and Eduardo, which make me not want to play video games, maps which feel like thought was only put into a single point of interest like Wackistan, where it's only fun if you spend the entire game attacking and defending Objective C. Likewise, Sandy Sunset is a brilliant map if you pretend objectives A, B, E, and F don't exist and spend the entire match fighting over C and D in the city. There's a bunch of levels like Kodak where playing the objective is meh as fuck, but hanging out and fighting in the boonies is surprisingly fun. Then you get the cream of the crop. Tensa Town, Lenovo, and District. The kind of levels where not only the objectives, but even No Man's Land are just so well crafted that there's seldom a dull moment when you play them. As the game stands now, I still love it. A lot of the maps desperately need to be reworked because there's like 3 or 4 good ones in a pool of like 20-ish maps, but the overall experience is still very enjoyable. When you can get into a fucking game. BattleBit is dead. Of the 3 million plus copies they sold in the months following their June 2023 early access release, the player count has spiraled to a few hundred a day. If you go to BattleBit's store page, Steam informs you that the game has not been updated since December of 2023. And that's true. The version of the game presently on Steam hasn't been touched in 22 months. But if you go to the official BattleBit Discord, you can see all the blood, sweat, and tears they've put into overhauling most of the levels in the game, with no intention of releasing them until the big update is ready to drop on Steam. This, in my opinion, is what killed BattleBit. First is the devs returning to an old and arduous development cycle, which is now detrimental to the longevity of the game given the newfound scale of its player base, and the second is the developers refusing to post information outside of their Discord, leaving the overwhelming majority of the player base in the dark about what is going on. The BattleBit devs are no stranger to retooling their game. The Remastered in BattleBit Remastered is a reference to how often they remade the game from the ground up, with the version that hit Steam Early Access essentially being the 5th rebuild of the game. The big update I mentioned earlier began life as an overhaul to the game's sound effects, but between feature creep and the Good Idea Fairy, it appears to have potentially morphed into a 6th rebuild of BattleBit. And if this is true, it would make sense to stop balancing and tweaking mechanics in the old game, as all of that work would end up being for nothing if the underlying systems for those mechanics are vastly different in the 6th iteration. This style of development is not inherently bad, but is very, very slow and requires clear and constant communication with your player base, not your fucking Discord. This is exactly what the Indie Stone does with Project Zomboid. They stopped updating Build 41 in December of 2022, but kept the flow of information going about Build 42 on the game's Steam library activity feed, and continue to do so even after Build 42 entered an opt-in unstable public beta in November of 2024. Would BattleBit still be alive if the developers continued to post progress reports on Steam instead of hoping players tune into their silly Twitch podcast or join their Discord just to figure out what the hell is going on? No. Not in the fucking slightest. Gamers are fickle little shits with fried dopamine receptors who need to be accosted with shiny new things with great regularity lest they move on to greener pastures. This slow, drawn-out style of development works for Project Zomboid because Project Zomboid is the fucking Mecha King Ghidorah of zombie apocalypse simulators. There is no game even remotely like it, so you're either playing Project Zomboid or you're just not playing at all. The FPS genre is too well served for any game not named Counter-Strike to survive this level of neglect. Only the most ardent BattleBit fans would be willing to stick with the game knowing they wouldn't see much needed updates and quality of life improvements anytime soon. Which, ironically enough, is the state the game is currently in. Dead as shit. The play to keep BattleBit alive would have been for the devs to never stop the flow of information on Steam and let the entire community know about the massive overhauls taking place under the hood and why it would mean no balancing tweaks or code-related fixes for an extended period of time, while also not completely abandoning the currently available game by releasing the reworked maps as they finish them to keep the casuals coming back for that fresh new content. And I am 99.999% certain the new and reworked maps would have been backwards compatible with the Steam build, because after 18 months of radio silence on all relevant platforms, the devs posted a 17-second trailer for Operation Overhaul on YouTube, and the entire game is indistinguishable from the currently available product. But like I said, that would have been the correct course of action. Because sadly, or thankfully, depending on how bitter and vindictive you are towards strangers on the internet, it's too late for BattleBit. They burnt all their bridges and goodwill with the community a long time ago, and Battlefield has spent the past 4 years in overdrive mending fences. If the devs had played their hand right, BattleBit Remastered may have been able to coexist with Battlefield 6, but unfortunately they shat the bed in the worst way possible, and Battlefield is now back in full force, ready to sweep up all the players they lost with Battlefield 5 and 2042. As for Battlefield 6, I'm not too keen on having a kernel-level anti-cheat installed on my computer that the Saudi Arabian government has access to, but life is full of tragedies beyond our control, so let's move on. From what I played in the beta, the game is fucking brilliant. I think BattleBit's gunplay is still more skillful and satisfying, but Battlefield 6 is looking like it has the edge in level design. This is the first time in a long time a Battlefield beta is shipped with a good map, let alone 4 of them. BF2's Gulf of Omen demo was the last time the free sample had a good map. While I'm not disappointed Firestorm is coming back, as I do enjoy me some Firestorm, Where the fuck is Sane Crossing? Getting killed by the debris from the upper floor of this building caught me off guard, cause that shit ain't happened since Sane Crossing. If y'all are gonna reintroduce the more intricate and tactical destruction from the battlefields of yesteryear into Battlefield 6, on top of the standard fare of knock out all the walls to make the building fall down, then dog, you gotta bring back the fucking king. Bring back Sane Crossing, best base game map from Battlefield 3, and I will hear no argument against it. Bring back Zeba Tower, Scrap Metal, and Danya Fortress while you're at it too. Speaking of close quarters, I am a little disappointed to see the state that knifing is in. Being a bit of a knifing fiend in Battlefield 3 onwards, it's sad to witness what I considered to be a prominent feature of the series devolve into somewhat of a clunky afterthought. Sometimes, like you're seeing here, it works great and you just stab everyone to death and collect a few tags in the process. But other times, it's a freaky, glitchy mess struggling to function, and sometimes it just shits the bed and quits, leaving you high and dry. I imagine most of this will be ironed out in the months following release, but even looking beyond the glitchiness, it is far removed from the fast, fluid mechanics of Battlefield 3, 4, and 1. Like, you gotta get your knife out well ahead of time and make damn sure you get them while their back is turned. Gone are the days of the double flick of the wrist frontal assault. Rest easy, my good friend, you served me well. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. I've been meaning to vent about BattleBit for the past month and change, but I've been too fat to do so until right this very moment. Leave a comment about how the state of BattleBit makes you depressed, or if you think I'm a fucking idiot and you want to suck off Battlefield 5 in 2042. Hell, show some love for Battlefield 1. I think it's an objectively good game that I just happen to dislike for completely subjective reasons. Anywho, I'm out. When I get back, I'm gonna talk about fucking Marathon.